God bless you. Welcome to God's Living Word. Our heart for this series is to teach you how to walk like Jesus Christ, to walk out with power that makes a difference, and to know that you're connected to God. Our great desire is that you're able to study the Bible for yourself with accuracy and receive answers to your prayers. Let's get started in the beginning. If you have a Bible, you can turn to Genesis chapter 1, or if you'd like to follow along with the notes, you can click the link below the video. Genesis chapter 1, and we'll start in verse 1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." God created all of life. Everything that we know it today is because God created it. Let's look at verse 2. It says, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." When God first created the earth, it was empty. It was covered in water. But his heart was not intended to leave it that way. God created the heaven and the earth to fill it. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 45. God had a plan to fill the earth because he desired a family. Isaiah 45, and in verse 18, it says, "For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it, he hath established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else." God formed the earth to be inhabited. He desired there to be life. And so we'll continue to see in Genesis how God creates the heavens and the earth and forms life. Look at Genesis back to chapter 1, and we'll pick it up in verse 3. "And God said, Let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day." God called the light day, and the dark night. Day and night as we know it today were set up in order way back in Genesis, verses 3 through 5. Day and night are what they are because God created them that way. Let's look at verse 6. "And God said, Let there be a firmament, or an expanse, in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, Let the waters under heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathered together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good." See how as God speaks something into being, it is so? All of this life that God spoke into being was according to what he spoke it to be so. We can see a great parallel of this record in Psalms. Turn to Psalm 104, and we'll get to see David praising God for his creation. Psalm 104, and we'll pick it up in verse 5. Says, "Who," referring to God, "laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever. Thou coveredst it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains." This refers to that earth that God created when it was covered in water. But, as we read in Genesis, at God's command, the waters moved. Look at verse 7. "At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hasted away. They go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound, a firmament or an expanse, that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. How wonderful God is ordering the heavens and the earth, preparing it for life. God's great desire is to have a family, and He's ordering this life, preparing it as the place of man, his dwelling place. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 1, and in verse 11 says, And God said, Let the earth bring forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself, upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after its kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. Again, we see God speaking into being, and it was so. The great principle here that God sets forth about the seed yielding after its kind. This is a pattern for all of life, and this pattern is true for physical life, plant life, and spiritual life too. This is so important because with this pattern that God sets forth, we can understand the seed whether or not we can see it. If you consider an apple, you cannot see the seeds of an apple, but simply by looking at the fruit, how it looks, how it tastes, you know that that's an apple. Why? Because the seed bears fruit of its kind. Again, this is true physically and spiritually. We can tell the fruit of something by understanding the seed of it. Look at verse 14. And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and a lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and the fowl that they may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. How beautifully God is filling the earth, the beautiful things of the field, and the animals, the living creatures. Verse 25. And God made the beast of the earth after its kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. God gave man and woman dominion over everything in the earth. He gave them to subdue it. And he created man and woman in his own image. He desired children. When everything bears the seed after its kind, God created man and woman in his own image to be his children, his kind. And he gave them dominion over all of it so that they can have a rich life. Verse 29, and God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, and it was so. Verse 31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. So here we see in 6 days, God sets up all of life. He creates the heavens and the earth, and fills it for a full life for man. If you look in your notes, there's a chart, and we will very briefly look at these events in accordance with the days that God records them. God was alone in the beginning in Genesis 1:1, and he created the heavens and the earth. In Nehemiah 9:6, it says that God alone created the heavens and the earth. Now, it's interesting to note when we read Psalm 104 and Job 38, we can actually account God creating angels in between the time that the heavens were created and the earth was created. And of course, when God created the earth, as it said in Genesis 1:2, it was covered in water. And like we looked at in Isaiah 45, it was for the purpose of being inhabited. Day 1 was the account of God speaking light into being, and it separating day from night. As God spoke it, it was so. On day 2, God made a firmament or an expanse, and it divided the waters from above and below the firmament. Day 3, God gathered waters together for seas and made land appear. He made plant life, and he introduced this great principle of seed to us, everything bearing after its own kind. In day 4, God made the sun and the moon and the stars. He ordered time, seasons, and years. On day 5, God filled the seas and created great whales and all the other soul life that was in the fish of the seas. On day 6, God continued to fill the earth with the beasts, and he established again that everything was after its own kind. Also on day 6, we see God create man and woman in his own image, and he gave them dominion over everything in the earth. In verse 31 of Genesis, we saw that everything that God made, he said, was good. Everything. Everything within the heavens, everything within the earth, all was created within 6 days, and every single thing at that time, God called good. How loving for God to put all this together for man, to be able to have a wonderful life, to be able to enjoy the fruit and the herb yielding seed after its kind, to continue producing for life. Every beautiful thing that God ordered was to sustain life. And he created all of these things for man to have a quality life. Can you see how God desired a family to love? He just wanted children, and he gave them everything they needed. Let's take a closer look at the creation of man in Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis chapter 2, we'll look at verse 7, and we'll see some of the intricacies of how God made man. Verse 7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So we see man's body was formed out of the dust of the ground. But God also specifies that he breathed breath into man. And because of that breath, man became a living soul. Man needs both body and soul to have life. That's why when a person takes their last breath, they're pronounced dead. Plant life does not have breath. It is simply dust. It has a body. And animal life has both body and soul, just like man. They have a body and they have breath life. So, what separates man from animals? Well, it's said that man was created in God's image. Let's take a look at John chapter 4, and we'll look at verse 24. We'll get a better idea of what God's image is. In John chapter 4, verse 24 says, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. God's image is spirit, not body or breath. It's spirit. Man was different than animals because God created him not only with a body and not only with breath, but also with spirit. Let's look at 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4. And in verse 13, it says, hereby we know that we dwell in him, and he in us, because he hath given us of his Spirit. We'll check one more verse in Romans chapter 8. There's a large difference between man and animals, and that is the spirit that God created in Adam and Eve. Romans 8 and in verse 16, it says, the Spirit itself beareth witness with our spirit that we are the children of God. You see, that spirit is that seed of God. His spirit in a man or woman is God's kind. It's his nature. That new spiritual nature in man that separates him from plants and animals is the Spirit of God. Let's take a look at John chapter 6. God gave man this spirit originally. He gave it to Adam and Eve. He created them in his own image. And that spirit allowed them to openly communicate with God. God is spirit, as we saw in John chapter 4. And it's in that spirit that life is carried. For spirit in man is God's seed, the father of life. Whereas body and soul are simply temporal. John chapter 6 and in verse 63, it says, it is the spirit that quickeneth, the flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life. Life is in the spirit. Simply the flesh and breath are temporal. Now it's interesting to note that there are other spiritual beings that don't have a body or soul. And these are angels, as we discussed, were created between the heavens and the earth. God created many angels, including 3 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, and Lucifer. Now, unfortunately, Lucifer was lifted up in his heart and turned against God. Let's look at Ezekiel chapter 28. Ezekiel 28, and we're going to take a look at verse 13. It says, thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. the sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day thou wast created. That's referring to Lucifer. Lucifer was an angel that God created, was absolutely gorgeous. Verse 15, thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day thou was created, till iniquity was found in thee. Verse 16, by the multitude of thy merchandise, they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Wow, we can see these beautiful coverings and this wonderful workmanship that Lucifer had caused his heart to be lifted up, and he sinned against God. Look at verse 17. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. Now see, Lucifer originally had the wisdom of God. He was created following God. He was perfect in his ways until iniquity was found within him. He was bearing the nature of God when he was beautiful. But he was lifted in his heart and went a different direction. Lucifer is the reason for all of the evil in our world today. He works against God's purposes and causes people to blame God for his doings. He is the devil and the father of lies. Look at John chapter 8. John chapter 8, and we'll read verse 44. It says, ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. God originally designed Lucifer to be beautiful, but he went a complete different direction. And you can see Lucifer's seed as the opposite of God's seed. You can see, ye are of your father the devil. Those that bring his purposes to pass on earth, they're of his seed. And we can know them by these fruits that they produce. Our Father God is all good, and he delivers us from the power of the devil. He desires life for us, more than abundant. That same life he placed Adam and Eve in. Look at 1 John chapter 1. We're going to see a little bit about God's nature in 1 John chapter 1. 1 John 1, and we'll start in verse 5. It says, this then is the message which we have heard of him, and declare we unto you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. There's no darkness in God's seed. There's no darkness in his nature. All darkness would have came from Lucifer, who's the opposite. Verse 3, that which we have seen and heard declare we unto you, that ye also may have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. And these things write we unto you, that your joy may be full. God is the author of all life. He originally created man, a three-part being: body, soul, and spirit, his seed, because he desired children. He created man after his own image so that he could have a family. God created all that is good on this earth for his children, and he gave Adam dominion over everything of the earth to subdue it for a great life. All of this our God did because he desired a loving relationship with his children. And God desires a loving relationship with you as well.